Hello, friends. Welcome to our weekly data talk, a show where we talk with data science leaders from around the world. Super excited to chat with Dr. Neil Yager. He's the co-founder and chief scientist at Phrasee. He earned his PhD in biometrics from UNSW. And super excited to have Neil in our chat today. How's it going, Neil?
Yeah, really good. I'm pretty excited to be here. This should be fun.
Thank you so much. So Neil, can you kind of share with us a little bit about your journey academically, and then what led you to just like focus in on data science?
Yeah, so I'm sure you and your followers know this term data science relatively new. So I did my PhD about 15 years ago in Australia, and it wasn't a term you used then. In fact, if you'd asked me at the time what I study, I would have used the term pattern recognition, statistical pattern recognition.
Okay.
Just because that's what I called it. In fact, I think even some of the conferences today, there's ICPR was a big one, International Conference on Pattern Recognition. That was just, and then it kind of turned into machine learning, like what it was called. It's been rebranded now. Everyone's AI, but at the time, what I studied, it was biometrics, so fingerprint recognition. So there's two sides of that. There's image processing, and to extract features from the images, and then there's pattern recognition to decide who that fingerprint belongs to. So that's where I kind of learned the two sides of it, kind of the vision side and the data analysis, pattern recognition, machine learning side of it, whatever you want to call it. Following that, I worked for a couple of years in the biometric industry, kind of doing consulting. From there, I went on to work in Canon Research. They have a research lab in Sydney, the big Japanese company. And that was a really great place to work. My job was largely as an inventor. So they have these research labs which are kind of looking into the future and trying to come up with new ideas, lay the sort of IP groundwork for the future of their products, kind of looking five years ahead. And once again, being the unifying theme in what Canon does is imaging, whether it's their cameras or their photocopiers. There's digital imaging is a big thing. So I got to work with a world-class team of researchers in the imaging and machine learning areas there. And that led to other areas that, taking me up to Phrasee, which I co-founded about 4.5 years ago now. To be honest, I didn't really have a background in language at the time. Still, I had the machine learning background, but I felt I had more of a computer vision image processing background. So I kind of picked up that as I went. And it's also kind of the first time, going back to your original question, the first time where I've actually considered myself to be a data scientist.
Neil, when you were in school, you mentioned that kind of the focus was around statistical pattern recognition, and you mentioned fingerprints. What were some of the projects you worked on back in the day?
Well, so my PhD was on new techniques for fingerprint matching. And so, I had some new ideas there. To be honest, I haven't kept up with the field, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's been kind of swept over by the deep learning tsunami like everything else since then, because there's quite a bit of hard-coded domain knowledge that went into it at the time. But after that, as being a consultant in the biometric industry, I was pretty fortunate to work on lots of interesting projects. It's an interesting area with facial recognition, recognizing people by the way they type, so keystroke dynamics.
Oh, interesting.
Probably my first foray into language was authorship attribution, so trying to identify people with patterns in the language that they use. So that's what I would call a behavioral biometric. It's biometrics aren't just biological things about you. You give away who you are by the way you act and you behave, and typing and language you use all feeds into that.
What was that transition like for you, going from images and then moving into language?
Yeah, really difficult in a sense, because language is so much harder. I mean, it's there has been huge advances in computer vision in the last few years, and there has been as well in language. I'm not going to say there hasn't, but I don't. My personal feeling is the field hasn't evolved quite as rapidly. I think thought or language is it's more kind of deeply rooted into what it means to be human. It's right, kind of really sits right next to language. And so a lot of the hard problems in natural language processing, a lot of people consider them to be AI completed. We can, that's almost what, Turing's the test is about. If you can solve the language problem, you've solved intelligence. One anecdote I can share is it wasn't that long ago that when I was working at Canon Research, I remember somebody coming into a meeting, a product person, and saying, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if you pointed your camera at something and you could say what it was? Like, is that a chair, or is that a phone, or is that a desk?" This was about 10 years ago, and we just said, "No way, you can't do that. There's so many different ways that a chair or table can look."
Let's see. Look at pause a little bit here.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, Neil, just caught you mid-sentence. Looks like the video just paused. Let me.
Okay. Is it still? Oh. Should we reconnect? I'm not sure if you can hear me. I don't seem to be having any connectivity problems. Hello.
Hello, Neil. Sorry, I got disconnected from Facebook Live for some reason. I apologize.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So, I missed that last anecdote. You were just jumping into the anecdote.
Well, I'm sitting in a meeting at a Canon Research, and someone kind of said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if your camera knew what it was looking at?" And all of us researchers said, "No way, not in our lifetime.
Yeah.
You're not." There's so many different ways a table can look like, a chair can look like, and the space of, in the pixel space is too large, and we just didn't think it would be possible. But then kind of 5 years later, now it's totally possible. And so I think, we've seen some huge advances in this, in kind of object recognition and vision. And similarly, there have been some pretty big advances in language as well, but I don't think quite to the same degree. There's still lots more open problems in language. And I think what you asked, what brought this about, is my transition from this kind of computer vision into language. It's tricky. Language is so messy. And just the space that language lives in, it's not continuous, which makes optimization hard on it.
Yeah, so my background was I started off as a copywriter, and so I love language, and I love reading the news. I love reading books, and I was flipping through an article recently, and it was like on the earnings page, and I looked at the very bottom of the article because there was no author assigned to the article, but it said something to the effect that it was like a natural language generation helped produce that earnings article.
Sure, yeah.
And I was like blown away
Yeah.
that like a computer like just generated this copy that was perfectly readable. It provided the facts, just the information that I needed. And I was really, really impressed by it.
Yeah, so, and I think this is going to become quite common. So that's the field called Robo Journalism. And so there's a lot of articles that people want to read that there's just not enough people out there to cover. So, sports at a very high level is not a problem, but think more about your local teams. You can take the raw numbers from the game and use an algorithm to spin that into a story, because there's a lot hidden in those numbers. And the narrative's not quite there just by looking. I mean, it's kind of hidden. And a lot of these articles are actually quite formulaic, depending on the spread of the match and whatever. You can have logic in there to just, it's called, the field's called data to text. And so I think you'll see more and more of this. Articles that you're reading are actually written algorithmically.
Do you, it was interesting, you talked about the Turing test and making text seem like it's written by a human. And if you're able to add some personality to it, I'm just thinking about if you train an AI to, let's just say, read everything about Charles Dickens, and then now can it then begin to create content that would be almost like a Charles Dickens novel?
Great question. So it depends at what level. There's absolutely, you can create content that on the surface looks like it uses the similar sorts of words as he would, and similar phrases and language. And so I don't know if you saw the news. It was just maybe 2-3 weeks ago. OpenAI got quite a bit of press because they created a language model that was able to generate text that looked surprisingly coherent. And they decided not to release this code. They thought it was too dangerous to release it.
I think I saw that headline I was like, that headline, of course, made me click on it.
Yeah. And it was a successful, I think it's, my personal thoughts are this is a bit of a successful PR stunt, not releasing that code. So what they've done is they've trained a language model. So what a language model is given some context, a few words, it assigns a probability to the next word. So it's quite a simple idea, really. So if I gave you the words, hello, my name, blank, you could pick up a dictionary and assign what's the probability the next word is, I don't know, cup. It's pretty much every word is going to have a negligible probability. The word is, hello, my name is going to have a high probability. Then you could go to the next word, and common names will have a relatively high probability. Random verbs in front of, they're going to get a low probability. And that's just kind of building on a just 3 or 4 words. What OpenAI did is they trained this similar system. It's just a language model. All it's doing is giving probabilities of the next word. They just trained this on a massive scale, like that no one's ever done before. I don't know, all of Wikipedia and all sorts of fictional novels and these things. And so when you create a language model like that, it's not just doing it on the previous 3 or 4 words. It has a much bigger window. It's taking the last 100, 200 words to guess the next one. And what you find is that the output is very coherent, and it looks very, very human. And you could do something if you trained it on all of Dickens. You could create content that looks like Dickens. But I think what people maybe, how I see this a little bit differently is the story doesn't just end there. It is just picking word after word based on statistical probabilities. It's not doing this content planning phase. So for, to keep the Dickens analogy, there's no kind of phase where he's thinking, okay, what's my plot going to be? Who are my characters? How are they going to develop over time? It's just picking one word after another, randomly, blindly. And if there's any actual story that develops, it would be purely accidental and very, very unlikely. So you can generate content that on the surface looks like it's written in a particular style. And maybe there's some uses for this for SEO or something, but I don't think you can say that's the same as a human writer who's actually sat down and generated valuable content that's worth reading. So I don't see it as the threat that they made it out to be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I saw something. This may have been like 2 years ago, where a similar thing where this AI was fed in like all the Star Trek scripts,
Yeah.
and then it was asked to produce a script based on
Yeah.
right, and so it actually produced, and they actually like shot this little film and put it on YouTube, right? So they actually filmed this, and like what you were saying, like the words, like the lines all made sense, but there wasn't like a logic to the story. Like it was like
That's right.
all
It's
over the
just gonna be
place.
random. And you're right. The language is going to be the right type of words in the right location, but doesn't have this higher level planning. And so this is kind of what I was saying. So I think to get to that step, we're going to need some more breakthroughs in the field of AI. It's kind of a neat technology, and there's definitely applications and uses for these language models, because what they can do is, they're good for making sure that this text is fluent and all these things, but it's not quite something, that people quite think it is, that's going to replace human creativity. So so the difference, this article that you saw, that's highly templated. A team of linguists and copywriters would have sat down and looked at lots of these, whatever earnings report it was, and found patterns and found a way to build it, to encode that logic to generate these articles. And if you take that far enough, you can actually make pretty sophisticated output. But that's not using these neural text generation techniques, where it's just blindly unsupervised, trained on a large amount of text and just let it go.
Mm-hmm. I got to tell you, so in my line of work, I'm like super excited about the developments of how AI is helping to produce copy. So just to give you an example, my boss this morning, there's a new article that came out about Experian, and my boss was like, let's make sure that we get this, promoted on social. So I would love to have a tool where I could put in that New York Times article, and then it would auto-generate, like, here's 50 different potential tweets for you.
Yep. Yeah.
Headline, quotes, right? And then I could just go like, yeah, no, yeah. And then have another model of like, what's like the percentage or likelihood of getting engagement on each of these potential examples. Like that excites me, because like that would save me a ton of time and help me focus in on strategy and creative development.
You kind of, summarized the Phrasee product, to be honest. This is what we do for our main product is email subject lines, but we use NLG, natural language generation, to generate the copy. And variants of it. And we also have these predictive models to guess, the open rates or the click rates, what's going to be more effective than others. And that's a machine learning problem.
That's
Given
brilliant.
lots of data, we have a better idea of what's going to work than any human could, just simply because we can't look at a million subject lines and see these subtle patterns.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think that is, you guys are ahead of the curve here. We need products like this to help marketers to be smarter with their marketing messages and also save them time.
Well, yeah, I think this is it. I think you probably see this, but we do get some marketers who think we're trying to put them out of business, but we don't see it that way at all. This is a tool to help them create context. Don't put all your time into the body of an email if no one's going to open it. And so what we can do is help write subject lines that are going to make sure more eyes get to see on the real creative side of things.
So what are some of the factors that you're measuring? Like when it comes down to like an email, obviously one of the biggest things is we want that email to be open. So
That's right.
Click to reading is like a huge metric that's going to be really, really important. Are there other factors you guys are looking at?
That is the main one for us, because everything downstream is correlated to that. The more people that open, the more people that click, the more people that click, the more people that purchase. So that's really the first step. And whoever doesn't open your email, you're done. You don't have any.
That's right. That's right. So I had a question around ethics, because as marketers, and I've been working in marketing for a very long time, there are things, people can write, and I've seen examples of this where the message itself is not truthful, right? People are just trying to get the click from Google Ads over to a landing page. You know, tons of examples of that. Unfortunately, there's like, you know, unethical marketing that's happening. And so I'm wondering, like, with an AI, that how do you set boundaries for an AI in developing copy that's going to be conversion driven, but also not unethical in the sense that the message that is being sent out, right, is not going to be inappropriate?
So that's a great question, just about ethics in general, and it's something that Phrasee spends a lot of time talking about. You know, we actually have an ethics policy.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's public, and there's lots of different sides to that. I mean, one side of it is there's certain companies that we won't work with. Obvious ones like gun manufacturers, because what we would do is we would help them be more effective at what we do, and if we've kind of deemed that we're not benefiting society as whole by helping them, we won't. We won't take their money, which is from a business perspective. Sometimes it's a hard decision to make, but it's one we've made. Beyond that, with the customers we do work with, as you pointed out, the language we use is important. So one thing is, yes, you can drive short-term engagement by using these sort of bait and switch techniques. And you get this, you'll see an initial jump in engagement, but that dies off over time. And when we engage with a customer, we want to work with them for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it would be very short-sighted to use these tricks, because people in your audience, they're going to stop,
that's right.
Stuff. And so that's another side of it, in that if you take a long-term perspective, it's just not effective. Then there's the other side of it. There are other techniques which are effective that we also won't use. So that's more things like, using anxiety and fear and sort of using people's emotion to get them to do things. Actually, unfortunately, these techniques can be very effective. There's examples. You can predict when people are, if they're in some sort of manic phase, and then maybe target luxury items to them at that particular spot when they probably can't afford it, but they're likely to buy. Those are also very unethical things that we've kind of made a public statement that we wouldn't use techniques like that. But the broader questions about what to do about that it's very difficult. I mean, ultimately, I do think there'll probably have to be some sort of legislation about how to do this, because I don't think we can just trust companies to always do the right thing when there's money to be made.
Right. No, I'm really happy to hear that you guys have been so thoughtful about this, thinking through all the different ways this could be abused, and even going so far as to, weed out certain industries. And also you're thinking through, like, yeah, we know this copy could be very effective during this time and help this business make money, but is it the right time to be targeting this person when they might be going through some sort of trauma? Like, the fact that you guys are thinking through all that is kudos to you guys for doing that. And I love the fact that you already have kind of an ethics policy. Why was that so important for you guys to have an ethics policy that's out there?
Well, it all sprung out of one of our campaigns called Emotions Matter. And we talked to various people. We talked to a psychologist about this, and this was something that was actually kind of recommended to us, because it's one thing to sort of do the right thing, but you also need to have a guideline in place to kind of hold you to task. And by making this public, that's then it's a lot harder to kind of deviate from that, if you know what I mean. And just also, to be honest, it just sort of reflects who we are as a company. These are kind of our company values.
I think that's awesome. I think that those types of values is what's going to attract a lot of great scientists to your organization. This brings me to my next question. We're in a couple of months, there's going to be a lot of young people graduating from school, finishing up their degrees in June. They're going to be picking their very first job, their very first data science role. What advice would you give to them as they're beginning to select the companies they're applying to? Because what you're speaking to about having an ethical standard, like, those are all really important things to be thinking through.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when it comes to recruitment, obviously I'm on the side of the startup, and we struggle a lot because obviously there's big players. There's Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, who have really aggressively go after a lot of the young people who are the kind of the top talent. And I think my encouragement to people would be don't limit yourself to that. There's definitely there's a lot to be gained by going the startup route, and maybe write out not necessarily financially your best choice, but there's the ethics side of things is one area which you should consider, because in a small company everybody has a say in things, and you can actually make a difference. You're not just a cog in the bigger machine. And so that's one thing, and that's just one reason. I can think of many reasons why, but that would be my encouragement to people, is to not just go for the big names. Also seek out the smaller companies, because they're also doing some really interesting things, and you'll probably have a lot more say in how things work.
When your company is reviewing resumes and bringing people in for these positions, what type of person are you looking to bring on?
Well, so it depends in what area. But for me, if I was hiring a data scientist, I put a strong emphasis on mathematics, probably more so than coding experience. And that's just my experience. Is I tend to think a lot of the code you can you can pick up as you go, but if you really have to have this background, or just really show an interest in statistics and mathematics. And I think that's one area where I think people should really kind of focus. That's just kind of in my department. Obviously, every team has different requirements. The product team is looking at developers. And so beyond that, yeah, we're also looking for just people who are, enthusiastic, excited about opportunities.
So for somebody who doesn't have a background in natural language processing, that's okay.
Absolutely. Like I said, I don't necessarily have this, and I'm not. We're actually thinking maybe it's time to hire somebody who has a PhD in this field, but we don't have that yet. It's machine learning is important, and stats, and that for us in particular, you have to kind of be very comfortable with that side of things.
Well, I think it's really cool what Phrasee is doing, helping businesses market better by using text and smart text to drive conversion. I think that's brilliant. I'm super excited to see what you guys do next. Are there any, I'm curious, are there any companies or examples of natural language processing that really impresses you?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I mean, there's so many great things going on. I love some of these kind of really these I think they're used a lot by sort of trading houses, but what they do is they try to get sort of broad sentiment scores across a whole population. So monitoring a large range of Twitter feeds and social media output, just to try to kind of get your finger on the pulse and get a general feeling for where things are at. I think this is really exciting because it's the sort of thing that wasn't possible all that long ago. A couple things kind of had to come together, just the availability and the instant, of all this data, and the ability to process it. I find that stuff quite exciting. But also, of course, my field, I think natural language generation is a field that's really in its infancy. We've kind of covered the main applications already. With Robo Journalism and the sorts of work we're doing at Phrasee, but that's kind of the next step in interacting with computers is for them to be able to generate language and communicate in that way.
Neil, for the companies that are looking to bring on Phrasee, what's that process look like for the marketers that have like their own internal systems?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we integrate with ESPs. So our main product is a email subject lines. And so we want to be as frictionless as possible. So we kind of already have integrations with things like Salesforce and IBM Watson. So hopefully that's not going to be too much of a jump for people. Although there's lots of ESPs out there, so we don't integrate with them all. But beyond that, what the process is they log into our SaaS product. They click a button, it generates language, and they send it out as a split test. And by sending it out as a split test and uploading those results, that's how our system learns over time. That's the kind of the feedback loop. So the idea is over time you learn more and more about an audience and how it responds to language.
Very cool. So in these split tests, are both splits generated by the AI, or is one like human, one AI?
Yeah, we tend to use a human control. So our ideal setup is one human line, 9 kind of Phrasee AI lines. And we want the human control in there is just to demonstrate the value that we're adding. Really.
Gotcha.
And also the other important thing is, people might say, oh, well, you've got 9 lines, the human's got 1, of course you're going to win. Well, the answer to that is we need 9 lines to learn. This is a test that we're learning over time, not to put too much faith in any one particular campaign. What you want to look at is win rates over time. And it's quite clear that we're not winning 90% of the time. It's not random like that. We're winning 95, 96% of the time. We don't always win, but we win more than what you would expect through randomness. And all this data means it's continuing to learn over time.
That's very cool. Well, it's awesome to hear all the work you guys are doing at Phrasee. I'm as a marketer and as a writer, I'm excited about it because to me, it's like, you know what? Like, let the best copy win. Let's get the most business, the most relevant traffic to the site. We're all in this together. Absolutely. And also, for those that are the writers like myself, like the cool thing is that it frees you up to develop new creative campaign, new ideas, developing the plots of the new stories that are going to go out there.
That's the fun stuff anyways, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the fun stuff. That's the fun stuff for sure. Well, Neil, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your background in data science with us, your journey, and also the work you're now doing, which is super exciting around natural language processing.
Great. Well, thanks very much for having me. This was great.
Thanks.